God is irrelevant, really. I think I understand how human beings came to believe in gods and divine spirits of various kinds. When we didn't understand much about the world around us, about how it worked, we explained events in terms of the activities of spirits. As our understanding of the world grew, these spirits were pushed more and more to the margins. Their activities were confined to the limits of creation, like the end and the beginning, for instance. And they were confined now to only actions which broke the laws of nature, not acts of the natural world itself. And these came to be called miracles. These were unnatural, rare events that broke the world. They're violations of the laws of nature, acts of violence against nature. Eventually, these divine beings were pushed out of the world, usually onto a mountain or into the sky, where they now acted only remotely, not as our neighbours here in the natural world. And mostly they were now he. It required extraordinary interventions for these gods to be able to interact with the world and with us. And it involved extraordinary acts on our part too, in order to facilitate such interactions, rituals of increasing complexity. Long after their usefulness as explanations for the world around us disappeared, these traditions persisted. Traditions take on a life of their own. They don't like to die. They become repurposed to serve other ends, to undergird morality, for example, to uphold certain societal structures, to maintain patriarchal power. These traditions fight to maintain themselves, and they find many willing warriors among those who seek to benefit from their maintenance. Now, this account may all seem rather speculative and perhaps oversimplified, and maybe it is, but I think it has considerable explanatory power. When I look around at the world today and when I look at my own life, I can't think of a single good reason for believing in God. What would change for me if I did? How would my life be different? I think I can take a shot at answering that because, you see, God meant nothing to me during my childhood and early teenage years. But then, in my late teens and early 20s, I became a Christian. And my life did change. Changed a lot. I went to theological college and became an Anglican priest. I worked in parishes and in hospitals. I earned a PhD in theology. I taught at universities and colleges. Yes, some big changes. But did I change? Did I change as a person? Did my values change? Did my behaviour change? No, not really. My morality didn't and doesn't derive from Christianity, any more than most of yours does, except maybe for the more questionable elements. My morality derives largely from the Greco-Roman tradition. There's really nothing specifically Christian about it, except, as I say, the questionable bits, attitudes towards sex and women mostly. My attitudes towards sex didn't change. I didn't abstain from sex when I became a Christian. Actually, my sexual experience was very limited at that stage. I only really became sexually active after I became a Christian. And this continued while I was in theological college, before I was married. The fact that I was going to have sex was never in question. It was never even really a moral issue for me. My sexual morality was concerned with how I treated the other person, whether I behaved responsibly in that situation. It was not concerned with whether I actually had sex or not. That wasn't a moral question for me either before or after I became a Christian. Sexuality is one area where I think the specifically Christian contribution is extremely questionable. Nor did I suddenly see homosexuality as a sin. In fact, once again, my understanding and experience of this was not particularly extensive before I became a Christian. It wasn't until I went to theological college that I first knowingly encountered a homosexual person. Of the approximately 30 men who were at college when I began to attend, and yes, they were all men in those days, from memory, 8 or 9 of those were gay, and not necessarily celibate gay either. This was new to me, but at no point did I regard this as sinful. Again, my concern was with the people as people. Their sexuality was irrelevant. And these moral values that I held didn't derive from Christianity. They predate my conversion and postdate my reconversion, if you like. Again, the specifically Christian contribution to this area of morality is almost entirely negative. Nor did I suddenly become concerned with issues such as poverty or political oppression or women's equality or environmental issues when I became a Christian. These values and commitments were already firmly in place before I became a Christian, and their origin is elsewhere. If anything, it was a struggle to retain these beliefs and commitments under the pressure of the Christian tradition, which has called the poor blessed, has upheld unjust political systems throughout history, which has sought to keep women in their place, and has largely ignored this world in favour of some other world. It was in spite of, rather than because of, Christian tradition that I maintained these beliefs and values. And it always required some intellectual gymnastics on my part to find support for my ethical positions within that tradition, which, of course, you can do. Everyone can do. My values were formed during my education. They were formed by my personal reading, which was very extensive. I read very widely. My values were formed by my personal struggles with ethical questions and by reason. Occasionally, the Christian tradition had some input into that, simply because it's a major influence on our society. But most of the positive contributions that Christianity made actually have their origins elsewhere. Unfortunately, most of the negative contributions seem to be native to the Judeo-Christian tradition. I was largely formed as a person before I became a Christian, and becoming a Christian didn't really change me as a person, although it clearly changed my external life circumstances. Similarly, when I ceased to be a Christian and ceased to believe in God, I didn't really change as a person. I didn't suddenly become a dissolute fornicator. I didn't suddenly adopt a me first and me only ethical position. I didn't become less concerned about social and political issues. Believing in God or not believing in God made little difference to me as a person. Of course, I know there are people out there who will tell their story about how finding God changed their life, maybe even saved their life. However, I think that has more to do with finding a purpose, making a commitment and finding a community than it has to do with God per se. I've no doubt there are people out there whose lives have been similarly changed by becoming an animal rescuer or a surf lifesaver. So, I can see no reason at all to believe in God, neither intellectually nor in terms of the impact such a belief would have on my life.